Poor girl finds millionaire tied to a post. Her action surprises everyone. Without hesitation, she decides to help him, but what happens next changes everything. He, accustomed to controlling everything, never imagined that someone so simple could change his life. What she did for him will leave everyone shocked and questioning who really has power. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll hear in your life. The sun beat down mercilessly on the vacant lot in upstate New York, creating waves of heat that distorted the arid landscape. Robert Mitchell tried to move his arms, but the rough ropes cut into his wrists with each attempt. His mouth dry as sandpaper, the 52-year-old businessman could barely form coherent words as he shouted for help amid the suffocating silence. How had he gotten there? Memories jumbled in his confused mind. The last thing he remembered was leaving a business, meeting in Riverside, driving his black BMW down a country road when something made him stop. Now he found himself tied up near a pile of old cans and debris, his Armani suit torn and stained with red dirt. The thirst was torturous. His attempts to shout became increasingly weak, reduced to hoarse moans that echoed in the emptiness. Despair was beginning to set in when he noticed movement among the dried bushes. A small, agile shadow moved cautiously, approaching and retreating like a wild animal studying its prey. Amy Beth was only 11 years old, but her eyes carried the bitter wisdom of someone who had learned too early that the world offers no guarantees. For almost 2 years she had lived alone, since her mother disappeared one ordinary morning, leaving only an empty promise that she would return soon. The girl had waited weeks, then months, until she understood that some promises are never kept. Hidden behind a thorny bush, she observed the tied man with a mixture of curiosity and distrust. Her instincts, honed by the need for survival, warned her of the danger of getting involved with strangers. But something in those desperate cries touched a sensitive chord in her heart, hardened by circumstances. Robert noticed the presence and tried to focus his gaze in the direction of the movement. "Please," he murmured with a broken voice. "Help me." The small figure approached a few steps, revealing a skinny girl with disheveled brown hair escaping from a worn-out baseball cap. Her clothes were a patchwork of clean but carefully mended pieces. Amy Beth remained silent for long minutes, assessing the situation with the seriousness of an experienced negotiator. "Are you rich?" she finally asked, her voice carrying a natural distrust. Robert, surprised by the direct question, just nodded, unable to understand where this would lead. The girl disappeared for a few moments and returned with a rusty knife she had found among the debris. With precise and cautious movements, she began to cut the ropes that bound the man's wrists. Robert felt immediate relief when his hands were freed, followed by intense pain as circulation returned to his numb fingers. "Thank you," he whispered, trying to stand up with difficulty. His wobbly legs barely supported him, and Amy Beth, despite her small size, offered her shoulder as support. "Don't thank me yet," she replied, with a maturity that contrasted with her age. "Can you walk?" Robert tried to take a few stumbling steps, leaning on the girl who, surprisingly, demonstrated unexpected strength. "Where are we going?" he asked, still dazed. Amy Beth pointed to an undefined direction among the bushes. "To my house," she said simply, as if that explained everything. The journey was slow and painful. Robert, accustomed to the comfort of air-conditioned cars and climate-controlled offices, felt every stone beneath his Italian shoes. Amy Beth, on the other hand, moved with the ease of someone who knew every inch of that hostile terrain. She stopped frequently to allow him to rest, offering warm water from a crumpled plastic bottle she carried in her faded school backpack. "Why are you helping me?" Robert asked during one of the stops, genuinely intrigued. Amy Beth looked at him with an expression too serious for a child. "Because you need it," she answered, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, and because no one else would. After almost an hour of walking, they arrived at a place that defied all of Robert's expectations. A yellow school bus, obviously abandoned for years, was positioned under the shade of some trees. But it wasn't just an abandoned vehicle. It was a carefully organized and surprisingly welcoming home. Amy Beth had transformed the interior of the bus into a functional and cozy space. Colorful curtains made of scraps covered the windows, creating a sense of privacy and protection. The seats had been reorganized to form different areas: a small improvised kitchen with a gas stove, a study area with carefully stacked books, and a corner that served as a bedroom with clean blankets neatly folded. "Welcome to my home," she said with discreet pride. Helping Robert sit on one of the seats cushioned with homemade pillows, the businessman looked around with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. How had an 11-year-old girl created this refuge in the middle of nowhere? Amy Beth moved through the space with the efficiency of an experienced homemaker. She prepared an herbal tea in a small kettle and offered cookies she kept in a colorful tin. "You can stay here until you feel better," she said, serving the tea in a mismatched but clean mug. "But then you'll have to leave." Robert drank the tea slowly, feeling the warm liquid ease the thirst that had been torturing him. For the first time in hours, he managed to organize his thoughts. "How do you live here alone?" he asked, still processing the reality of this extraordinary situation. "I learned," Amy Beth replied simply, sitting on a wooden box that served as a chair. "When you don't have a choice, you learn fast." There was a mature resignation in her words, but also a silent strength that deeply impressed Robert. While resting in the bus home, Robert began to reflect on his own life. President of a construction company, owner of apartments in New York City and at the beach, imported cars, robust bank accounts, and yet in that moment of absolute vulnerability, he had been saved by a child who lived with fewer resources than he spent on a single meal in fancy restaurants. The afternoon slowly fell over upstate New York, painting the sky with orange tones that infiltrated through the improvised curtains of the bus. Amy Beth lit a small oil lamp, creating an even more welcoming atmosphere. Robert observed each movement of the girl, fascinated by her autonomy and the way she had created a functional life in such adverse circumstances. "Do you have family?" she suddenly asked, breaking the contemplative silence. Robert hesitated before answering. Technically, he had ex-wives, adult children who barely spoke to him, some distant cousins who only appeared when they needed financial favors. "Not exactly," he answered honestly. "And you?" Amy Beth took time to respond, distractedly fiddling with the brim of the cap she never took off her head. "My mom. She had to travel," she finally said, with a voice that tried to sound casual, but betrayed deep pain. "She'll come back someday." Robert noticed the merciful lie the girl told herself, the defense mechanism that kept her functioning despite the abandonment. At that moment, something moved inside his chest. A strange sensation he hadn't experienced in decades. Genuine compassion, perhaps, or maybe it was something deeper. Robert spent the night in Amy Beth's bus home, lying on one of the seats with blankets that smelled of cheap laundry soap but were impeccably clean. It was the first time in decades he had slept in a place without air conditioning, flat-screen TV, or high-speed internet. Paradoxically, it was one of the most peaceful nights he'd had in years. By morning, Amy Beth was already awake when he opened his eyes. The girl was preparing a simple coffee on the small stove, moving silently so as not to wake him. The golden light of dawn filtered through the patchwork curtains, creating an almost magical environment inside the abandoned vehicle she had transformed into a home. "Good morning," she said, offering a mug of coffee with milk. "Are you feeling better?" Robert sat up slowly, testing his strength. The dehydration had passed, and although he still felt shaken by the traumatic experience of the previous day, his mind was clearer. "Much better, thanks to you," he replied, accepting the coffee. The liquid was strong and sweet, exactly what he needed. "Amy, I need to ask you an important question. Do you really live here alone? For how long?" Amy Beth hesitated, fidgeting with the cap that never left her head. "Almost 2 years, she finally admitted. Since she needed to travel to sort some things out." The lie sounded more fragile with each repetition, but Robert understood it wasn't the time to press. "And how do you get all this?" he asked, gesturing to the organized interior of the bus. "Food, water, clothes?" Amy Beth shrugged, as if it was something natural. "There's a small market in town that sometimes gives me fruit that's about to go bad. Mrs. Mary from the bakery saves yesterday's bread, and I know where there's a faucet that always works." The simplicity with which she described her daily struggle for survival deeply touched Robert. While he worried about fluctuations in the stock market and million-dollar negotiations, an 11-year-old child had created a complex system just to get one meal a day. "Amy, I want to repay your help," said Robert, carefully choosing his words. "You saved my life yesterday. Let me help you now." The girl looked at him with distrust, the same expression she had used when she found him tied up in the vacant lot. "I don't want your charity," she replied firmly. "I didn't help you expecting anything in return." Robert was impressed by the girl's dignity, her refusal to accept help out of pity. It was a lesson in integrity that many adults in his social circle didn't possess. "It's not charity," he insisted. "It's justice. You have the right to a better life, to study, have a real home, food on the table every day." Amy Beth remained silent for a long moment, looking out the bus window at the arid landscape that surrounded her. "What if my mom comes back and doesn't find me here?" she asked in a small voice, vulnerable for the first time since Robert had met her. The question revealed the girl's deepest wound, the desperate hope that her mother would return, despite all evidence to the contrary. Robert felt his heart tighten. "We can leave messages, notices. If she comes back, she'll know where to find you." It was a vague promise, but Amy Beth seemed to cling to it like a lifeline. "Do you promise?" she asked, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I promise," replied Robert, and for the first time in years, he made a promise he knew he would keep at any cost. The journey back to civilization was a revealing experience for both. Robert called his personal driver, who arrived in less than 2 hours with clean clothes and water. Amy Beth observed everything with silent fascination: the luxury car, the latest generation cell phone, the deference with which the driver treated Robert. "You really are very rich," she commented during the trip to New York City, watching the urban landscape gradually appear on the horizon. Robert laughed, a sound that hadn't come from his throat in a long time. "Yes, I am. But yesterday, that meant nothing when I really needed help." Amy Beth stayed temporarily in Robert's apartment. On the Upper East Side, a penthouse with a panoramic view of the city. The girl walked through the immense space like an explorer in unknown territory, carefully touching the expensive furniture and observing the view from the balcony with wide eyes. "It's very big," she commented, standing in the middle of the living room that was larger than her entire bus home. "One person alone lives in all this." Robert realized the absurdity of the situation through the girl's eyes. A single man living in a space that could easily house an entire family. "Yes, just me," he admitted, feeling for the first time the lonely vastness of his existence. "But now there are 2 of us, at least for the time being." Amy Beth smiled shyly, the first genuine smile he had seen on her face. The adaptation wasn't simple. Amy Beth found everything strange: the bed too soft, the shower with abundant hot water, the refrigerator always full of food. On the first night, Robert found her sleeping on the floor of the guest room using only a thin blanket. "The bed is too soft," she explained when he asked. "I can't sleep properly in it." Robert understood that it would take time and patience for her to get used to a lifestyle so different from what she knew. In the following days, Robert began to take legal steps to formalize Amy Beth's situation. He hired the best lawyers specializing in child and adolescent rights, initiated the necessary processes for her temporary guardianship, and began looking for suitable schools to enroll her. Each bureaucratic step revealed more details about the girl's situation. Amy Beth did not have an updated birth certificate, had not been enrolled in any school for almost 2 years, and there were no official records of her whereabouts since her mother's disappearance. It was as if she had become invisible to the system. "It will be a long process," explained Dr. Henry, the lawyer Robert had hired. "We'll need to prove abandonment, neglect, and demonstrate that you can provide an adequate environment for the child. The juvenile court is strict in these cases. Robert was willing to face any legal obstacle. For the first time in his life, he had a purpose that went beyond financial profit. But he knew that the real challenge would be to completely gain Amy Beth's trust and help her build a new life without erasing the hope she still had regarding her mother. Meanwhile, in Robert's corporate world, his sudden absence for 2 days had generated speculation and concern among his partners. Important meetings were cancelled, contracts remained pending, and his secretary didn't know how to explain his temporary disappearance. "Robert, where were you?" asked Marcus, his oldest partner, during the first meeting after his return. "We tried to locate you for 2 days. We thought something serious had happened." Robert looked around the meeting table at the concerned faces of his business partners and realized that for the first time in decades, he had a story to tell that went far beyond financial reports and profit projections. "Something serious did happen," he replied slowly, "but also something wonderful." And then, to the surprise of everyone present, Robert Mitchell began to tell the story of how an 11-year-old girl had saved his life and in the process shown him what really mattered in human existence. Amy. Beth's enrollment at St. Cecilia's Academy, one of the most respected educational institutions in New York City, should have been a moment of celebration. Instead, it became the first major obstacle in the girl's journey of adaptation to her new life. Dressed in the new uniform, navy blue blazer, pleated skirt, and shiny leather shoes, Amy Beth looked like an actress playing a role she didn't completely master. "You don't need to wear the cap at school," Robert said softly as he accompanied her to the school entrance. Amy Beth adjusted the worn cap on her head, the same one she had been wearing since he met her. "I know," she replied, "but I'll wear it anyway." There was a stubborn determination in her voice that Robert had already learned to respect. Die zwei. Principal Mrs. Helen, an elegant grey-haired lady, received them in her office with professional courtesy that barely disguised her curiosity. "Mr. Mitchell, it's an honor to have your ward in our institution," she said, hesitating slightly on the word that defined the relationship between Robert and Amy Beth. "I'm sure Amy will adapt very well to our academic environment." Amy Beth remained silent throughout the presentation, carefully observing every detail of the school, the waxed corridors, the pictures on the walls, the other students talking in homogeneous groups. It was a world completely different from anything she knew, and her body language revealed growing discomfort. The first week was particularly difficult. Amy Beth, accustomed to the freedom and autonomy of her previous life, felt suffocated by the school's rigid routine. The other children, coming from structured and prosperous families, found her silent presence strange and her refusal to participate in conversations during breaks. "She doesn't mix with the other children," reported Teacher Marcy during a meeting with Robert. "She's intelligent, absorbs content quickly, but remains isolated, and she flatly refuses to take off that cap, even when we explain the uniform rules." Robert sighed, realizing that the transition would be more complex than he had imagined. At home, Amy Beth maintained her own routine that reflected her previous life. She woke up before dawn, meticulously organized her school materials, and prepared her own breakfast, even with a housekeeper available. "I don't need anyone to do this for me," she explained when Robert offered help. The housekeeper, Mrs. Rose, a kind lady who had worked for Robert for more than 10 years, observed Amy Beth with a mixture of admiration and concern. "That girl carries the world on her shoulders," she commented to Robert. "I've never seen such an independent child. It's as if she's afraid of needing someone." Robert began to understand that Amy Beth's forced independence wasn't just a matter of pride, but a survival mechanism developed after maternal abandonment. Trusting other people meant becoming vulnerable again, and the girl had learned that vulnerability could result in abandonment. Parallel to Amy Beth's adaptation difficulties, Robert faced turbulence in his professional life. His partners began to question the changes in his behavior and priorities. Marcus, especially, showed concern with what he saw as a dangerous distraction from business. "Robert, you cancelled 3 important meetings this week to take the girl to the doctor," Marcus said during a tense conversation in the office. "Our investors are noticing your absence. The shopping mall project in Riverdale is delayed because you haven't approved the latest budgets." Robert looked at his partner, realizing for the first time how his language focused exclusively on money and deadlines. "The girl has a name, Marcus. It's Amy Beth. And yes, she is my priority now," Robert replied with a firmness that surprised them both. "Business can wait a few hours when it comes to a child's well-being." Marcus shook his head, visibly frustrated. "You've changed, Robert, and I'm not sure if it's for the better." The pressure at work intensified when some clients began to question Robert's reliability. A high-end residential condominium project in Riverdale was delayed, and investors threatened to break the contract if they didn't see more dedication from him. "We're dealing with millions of dollars," said one of the investors during a tense meeting. "We need to know if we can count on your full attention." Robert felt divided between two worlds that seemed incompatible. On one side, the corporate universe he had built over decades, based on competitiveness, profit, and total availability. On the other, the responsibility of being the father of a traumatized girl who needed stability and constant presence. The situation became even more complicated when Amy Beth began to have nightmares. Robert would wake up in the middle of the night, hearing her cry in the next room, calling for her mother in distressing dreams. When he went to console her, the girl pretended to be asleep, refusing to show vulnerability even in her most fragile moments. "She needs psychological counseling," suggested Dr. Henry during one of the meetings about the guardianship process. "The trauma of abandonment is deep, and the transition to a new life can reactivate emotional wounds." Robert agreed immediately, but he knew that convincing Amy Beth would be another challenge. "I'm not crazy," she said categorically when Robert mentioned the possibility of talking to a psychologist. "I don't need a head doctor." The resistance was fierce, based on the fear of being judged or considered inadequate for her new life. It was during one of these night crises that Robert made a decision that would definitely change his perspective on priorities. He found Amy Beth sitting on the apartment balcony at 3 in the morning, looking at the city lights with a deep sadness in her eyes. "Can't sleep?" he asked, sitting beside her. Amy Beth shrugged, adjusting the cap she wore even to sleep. "Sometimes I dream that she came back and couldn't find me," she confessed in a low voice. "And then I wonder if I did the right thing coming to live here." Robert felt a pain in his chest, realizing that Amy Beth still blamed herself for the decision to accept his help. "Amy, look at me," he said softly. The girl turned her face, and for the first time he saw tears in her eyes. "You didn't abandon your mother. She abandoned you. And even if she comes back, that doesn't change the fact that you deserve a good, safe life full of opportunities." "But what if she's looking for me?" asked Amy Beth, her voice choked. "What if she goes to the bus and I'm not there?" Robert carefully hugged the girl, feeling how small and fragile she was despite all her apparent strength. "Then I will personally go with you to find her," promised Robert. "But while that doesn't happen, you're going to live the life that an 11-year-old girl deserves to live, with school, friends, security, and lots of love." Amy Beth allowed herself to cry in that embrace, releasing a pain she had been carrying for almost 2 years. The next morning, Robert made a decision that surprised everyone in his office. He called an extraordinary meeting with all the partners and announced that he was restructuring his participation in the company. "I'm going to delegate more responsibilities and reduce my workload," he declared. "I have other priorities now besides business." Marcus was visibly irritated. "Robert, this is madness. You're throwing away everything we've built together because of a child who isn't even your real daughter." The comment provoked a tense silence in the room. Robert stood up slowly, looking fixedly at his partner. "Marcus, Amy Beth is my real daughter," he said with a conviction that echoed through the room. "Maybe not biological, but real in all the ways that matter. And if you can't understand that, maybe it's time to rethink our partnership." The veiled threat was clear, and Marcus backed down, realizing he had underestimated Robert's transformation. Meanwhile, Amy Beth was slowly beginning to open up at school. She became friends with Carla, a quiet girl from her class who also felt out of place for being more shy than the other children. "Your cap is cool," Carla said during recess. "Why do you never take it off?" Amy Beth hesitated, then answered, "It's an important memory of someone special." The process of Amy Beth's guardianship was progressing favorably when unexpected news shook the entire structure that Robert had built over the last few months. Dr. Henry called on a rainy May morning with information that would change everything. Amy Beth's mother had appeared. "Her name is Lucy Sanders," explained the lawyer during an urgent meeting. "She contacted Child Protective Services, claiming that she returned from a trip abroad and discovered that her daughter was in the care of a third party. She's demanding the immediate return of the child." Robert felt the ground open beneath his feet. After 8 months living with Amy Beth, the idea of losing her was devastating. Amy Beth received the news in silence, sitting in the living room of the apartment. Her hands trembled slightly when Robert explained the situation, but she maintained a neutral expression, that mask of protection she always used when feeling vulnerable. "When does she want to see me?" she finally asked, her voice too controlled for a 12-year-old child. "Tomorrow," replied Robert, trying to keep his own voice steady. "The meeting will be supervised by the social worker. You have the right to choose if you want to go." Amy Beth unconsciously touched the worn cap she still wore every day, even after months of comfortable living. "I'll go," she said. "I need to see her." The night before the meeting was one of the longest in Robert's life. He observed Amy Beth during dinner, noticing how she played with her food without really eating, lost in thoughts she didn't share. "Are you afraid?" he asked gently. The girl took time to respond. "I don't know," she finally admitted. "I dreamed so much about her coming back, but now that it's going to happen, I feel strange." The meeting took place at the family court, in a neutral room designed for these delicate moments. Lucy Sanders was a 35-year-old woman, thin with restless eyes that avoided direct contact. She wore simple but clean clothes and carried a palpable anxiety while waiting for her daughter. When Amy Beth entered the room, she held Robert's hand with surprising strength. Lucy quickly stood up, extending her arms. "My daughter, how you've grown!" she exclaimed, her voice loaded with an emotion that seemed genuine. "Mommy missed you so much." Amy Beth remained motionless for a moment that seemed eternal, studying her mother's face as if trying to reconcile memory with present reality. Slowly, she let go of Robert's hand and walked to Lucy, who hugged her desperately. "I'm sorry, my daughter," whispered Lucy. "I'm sorry it took me so long to come back." During the 40 supervised minutes of the meeting, Lucy told a story about working in another state, documentation problems that prevented her return, financial difficulties that forced her to stay away. Amy Beth listened in silence, asking few questions, observing more than talking. "Now I can take proper care of you," promised Lucy, holding her daughter's hands. "I got a steady job, a small apartment, but it's ours. We can start over together." Amy Beth nodded, but Robert noticed that she didn't show the joy that would be expected from a child reuniting with her mother after almost 2 years. After the meeting, on the way home, Amy Beth remained in absolute silence. Robert respected her space, but the tension in the car was almost tangible. Only when they arrived at the apartment did she finally speak. "She smells different," said Amy Beth, an apparently simple observation that carried a world of meanings. In the days that followed, while lawyers debated legal issues, Amy Beth became more introspective. She spent hours in her room, organizing and reorganizing her belongings as if preparing for a move. Robert found her one afternoon, arranging her clothes in separate piles. "Are you packing?" he asked, trying to keep a casual tone. Amy Beth didn't raise her eyes from the clothes. "Maybe," she replied. "The social worker said I'll probably have to go live with her. She's my mom, right? That's the right place for me to be." Robert felt his heart break. He knew that legally Lucy had priority rights, but emotionally the idea of losing Amy Beth was unbearable. "Amy, can I ask you a question?" he said, sitting on the bed next to the piles of clothes. "Do you want to go live with her?" The question caught Amy Beth by surprise. She stopped folding clothes and finally looked at Robert. "Why are you asking that?" she replied with another question, her defenses automatically rising. "She's my mother. Of course I want to stay with her." But there was something in Amy Beth's voice that didn't convince even herself. Robert decided to be completely honest. "Amy, in the last 8 months you've become the most important thing in my life," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "If you want to go with your mother, I'll fully support you. But if a part of you wants to stay here, know that I'll fight for you with all my strength." Amy Beth began to cry, silent tears streaming down her face. "I don't know what I want," she finally admitted. "I dreamed so much about her coming back. But now here feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived." It was the first time she verbally admitted that she considered Robert's apartment as her true home. The situation became even more complicated when the social worker revealed details about Lucy's current life. The woman had been involved with drugs during the period she was absent, had a history of abusive relationships, and her financial situation was even more unstable than she admitted. "There's no evidence that she can't take care of the child," explained the social worker, "but there are risk factors that need to be considered." Robert hired private investigators who discovered more disturbing details. Lucy had abandoned Amy Beth not because of financial difficulties, but to follow a boyfriend who had promised to take her to Florida. The relationship ended badly. She was homeless for months, got involved with substances, and only now, discovering that her daughter was being cared for by a wealthy man, had she decided to reclaim her. She didn't. "Come back out of love," said Robert to Dr. Henry after receiving the investigator's report. "She came back out of self-interest." The lawyer agreed, but warned about the difficulty of proving this legally. "We have to be very careful. If we present this information the wrong way, it may seem like we're persecuting a mother in a vulnerable situation." It was Amy Beth who, without knowing these details, provided the most important clue. During a session with the psychologist, she had finally agreed to consult. She mentioned something that had bothered her since the reunion. "My mom didn't ask about the bus," she said. "She didn't ask how I survived alone where I lived if I went hungry. She only talked about the future, about starting over, as if the last 2 years hadn't happened." The psychologist, Dr. Carmen, identified the pattern immediately. Amy unconsciously realized that her mother's interest wasn't in her experience or well-being, but in reassuming a role she may not be prepared to properly exercise, she explained to Robert. "The girl is protecting herself emotionally." The turning point happened during a second supervised meeting. Lucy arrived with expensive gifts, brand-name clothes, electronic toys, things clearly beyond her financial capabilities. Amy Beth received them politely, but later whispered to Robert, "Where did she get money for all this? She said she was having financial problems." The answer came through the investigators. Lucy had borrowed money from distant relatives using the story of her daughter, who was being kept by a rich stranger. The plan was to win back Amy Beth and then try to extract money from Robert through emotional blackmail or lawsuits. With all this information, Dr. Henry structured a solid defense. "We won't attack the mother directly," he explained. "We'll demonstrate that Amy Beth is well adapted, emotionally and educationally stable, and that an abrupt change would be detrimental to her development." The custody trial was tense and emotional. Amy Beth, now 12 years old, had the right to express her opinion to the judge. She entered the courtroom wearing her impeccable school uniform, but still with the worn cap on her head, an image that perfectly symbolized her journey between two worlds. "Amy Beth," said the judge gently, "can you tell me how you feel about living with your adoptive father?" The girl took a deep breath, looked at Robert, then at Lucy, and finally answered, "Your Honor, for almost 2 years I took care of myself because I had no choice. Robert not only gave me a home, he gave me a family. He was there when I had nightmares, when I had difficulties at school, when I needed to go to the doctor. I love my biological mother, but Robert is my real father." The courtroom fell silent. Lucy began to cry, but not from sadness, from anger. "He alienated her against me," she shouted. "He used money to buy my daughter's love." Amy Beth turned to her mother, took off her cap for the first time in public, revealing old scars on her scalp. "Mum," she said with devastating maturity, "these scars are from when you left me alone and I had to learn to take care of myself. Robert didn't buy me, he saved me." The revelation of the scars, a consequence of injuries Amy Beth suffered during her first months alone, was the decisive moment of the trial. The judge granted permanent custody to Robert, with supervised visitation rights for Lucy. "This decision is not based on financial resources," he declared, "but on the best interest of the child, who has clearly found stability and true love in her current home." 6 months later, Robert and Amy Beth were at the registry office to finalize the adoption process. Amy Beth, now Amy Beth Mitchell, signed the documents with firm hands. Outside, a television crew was waiting for them. The story had become public and inspired many people. "How does it feel to be officially a father?" asked the reporter. Robert looked at Amy Beth, who smiled genuinely beside him, the cap finally kept at home as a reminder of strength, no longer as a shield. "Actually," replied Robert, "I became a father the moment she saved me in that vacant lot. Today we're just making official what we've known for a long time. We are a family." Amy Beth held his hand, and for the first time in years, Robert Mitchell felt truly rich. Today, Amy Beth Mitchell is 15 years old, in her first year of high school, and leads a social project that helps homeless children. Robert reduced his business activities to dedicate more time to his family and also support social projects. Lucy, after treatment, got a job and maintains regular visits with her daughter, a relationship that, although not that of mother and daughter in the traditional sense, has evolved into a respectful friendship. And the bus home where Amy Beth lived was transformed by Robert into a support center for children in vulnerable situations, a place where other brave little ones can find hope and a new chance to live. The end. Dear listeners, we hope that Robert and Amy Beth's story has touched your hearts as much as it touched ours. This journey teaches us that family is not defined only by blood, but by love, dedication, and true presence. To continue this emotional journey, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the deepest human bonds. You can find it by clicking on the link beside. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave your like on the video. Every day we bring unique narratives that celebrate the complexity and beauty of human life. Don't miss our next content, and please share in the comments